Our first program is about artificial intelligence. So those of you thinking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other applications in the data economy, I'd like to introduce you to Adam and Sarah.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. So as Kirsten said, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. I'm good to introduce Sarah and myself. We're going to move on to our polling questions, and then we'll jump right into it. So Sarah Sun is the Chief Data Strategist at GoldSpot Discoveries, a publicly listed company that uses AI to analyze geological data. She was educated at the University of Waterloo with a double major in math, finance, and statistics. Her experience includes business analytics, predictive modeling, data science, recruiting, innovation, data governance, monetization, and strategy. So we're in good hands. And of course, I'm Adam Allouba. I am a partner here at Dentons based in the Montreal office. I am the Montreal head of the Transformative Technologies and Data Strategy Group. I'm also the national co-lead of mining group for Canada. And so that makes a good fit with a company like GoldSpot. So now I'm going to bring up our first polling question. So here we're just trying to get at whether you're using AI. Are you already using it, thinking of using it? Don't be shy. Go ahead. And we should be seeing the results in real time. Election night. All right, so the main thing we're seeing so far is that the don't use it, don't want it, aren't thinking about it is the minority. A lot of you are either already using it in process or maybe on the cusp. So we'll take those numbers as they are right now, I think, and move on to the next polling question. So here we're trying to get at, how do you think about AI and legal risk? Is it a problem, not a problem? Do you understand it, not understand it? All right, so far we're seeing a good level of understanding and of concern. So anyone who picked the second category that we don't understand but we're not concerned about them, we'll talk after.
I'm most interested in this. We understand, but we're not concerned. I'm super curious to know why. I'm scared all the time.
I'm hoping that overlaps with the person who said we don't use AI and we're not thinking of it.
Good point. Good point.
So generally people understand, feel like they have a good handle on it, and they are concerned. So perfect, you're in the right place. That's the good news. So I'll go back to our presentation slide. So Sarah, just to get the discussion going, I mean, you guys are using AI in a very novel and interesting way. What are sort of some of the challenges that you've seen from a legal and business perspective? I mean, there are lots of questions about ethics and privacy and algorithmic transparency and all those sorts of things. What's your experience with that?
Oh my goodness, where to start? So to give you some background on what we do, like Adam mentioned, we are 3 years old and our specialty is artificial intelligence, but for the mineral exploration space. And so let me tell you, the mining industry, if you guys are thinking about using AI, or you feel like you're a little bit behind, there is no way you are as behind as the mining industry as a whole. When it comes to adoption of technologies and AI, so our clients come from all sorts of different backgrounds. I think they're very much on we would like to start using it, or they're starting to implement and develop their own teams and their own ideas from that perspective. But as a result, we play a lot of an education factor. So I think a lot of the risks when it comes to legal privacy ethics, there's a really high level understanding, and there's some concerns there. Like, for instance, are you going to put my data on the cloud? I think that's a common question we'll get. But a lot of the time I spend my time on the very front end, which is like, you're going to take my job. I don't want to work with you. Or what does AI actually mean? Or does this work? What happens here and there? And so every single one, and depending how far along the path our clients are, or we are in our own journey, they all have different legal and privacy concerns. And so I get the cloud question a lot. Cloud security comes up again and again and again. And I know that's a question that even the banks today are still trying to tackle and manage and understand. There's a lot of AI education on like, oh, this newfangled, I don't want to ever touch AI. And then we start with this journey of like, you know what, AI is not a new thing. It's maybe the latest buzzword. But we've been doing statistic modeling, we've been doing predictive modeling for a very, very long time. But the reason why there's been an explosion of interest and adoption is because now the industries are at a state where computation power, computers, data storage is now cheap, very, very cheap. Every single one of those cell phones in front of you can do so much more than the best computers could 20 years ago. And that's why all of a sudden there's an explosion in AI.
So maybe we're seeing an advance in the technology and the understanding is catching up behind it. One of the hot things that we see in AI a lot is concerns about ethics. And I always see a tendency whenever people start talking about ethics that people think, well, this is really a political question. This is kind of, some people see it as very important. Some people see it as less important. Bias, again, that's sort of a political question. I mean, does it matter if things are really representative of society? And, setting all of that aside, I mean, my angle on that is always to say, well, look, I mean, whatever your political views are, from a legal perspective, ethics and unbiased data really matters, because if you're not using unbiased data, if you're not using data that is truly representative of the population of whatever it is that you're trying to get at, whether it's human beings, whether it's geological exploration results, whatever it is, you're not going to have AI that works properly. You're going to have AI that produces bad results. You're going to have AI that does not give the end result that the client was looking for in the first place. And I think of examples like, some notorious ones where there was a major tech company that was using AI to sort of do a triage of the CVs that it was receiving. And what ended up happening, through no fault of anyone's, intentional efforts to create this bias, but because they had mostly hired men, the AI had learned that men were more interesting than women, and therefore, well, any CV that had a reference to a women's group or, Women's Chamber of Commerce, whatever, was just systematically excluded. There's a really interesting example of a startup here in Toronto that was using AI to do an early diagnostic for Alzheimer's, which is, fantastic. I mean, it's a very worthy endeavor. And when they started testing it, they realized it's an auditory test. So it listens to you talk and it says, yeah, there are signs of Alzheimer's or there aren't. It was attuned to the Central Canadian dialect. So, someone from the States, someone for whom English is a second language, didn't work properly because, it just wasn't programmed to pick up on the nuances in their speech patterns, which obviously is a big problem. So GoldSpot, you guys have to deal with ethical kinds of questions. I mean, even if you're not dealing with personal data, you're still dealing with sensitive data, confidential data. Geologists have an ethical framework. How do you guys sort of work with these questions?
So it's interesting because I actually believe that we have a head start on this. And it is something that has only really come to light for myself personally ever since I joined the mining sphere. I didn't realize that geoethics was so humongous, and it underpins what it means to be a geologist or work in these kind of fields. So for those of you who don't know, to be able to call yourself a geologist, it is a designation. There are tests. There's an organization that you have to pay fees to, and they're the ones policing. And so geoethics is a very big concern. Geologists, they're our first line of defense when it comes to the earth. They truly understand the earth, how it's put together, what could happen, natural disasters, unsafe working conditions. We think about the mines. It's a dangerous business. So they have their number one obligation is to notify us and help us understand those concerns. And they will lose their licenses if they do not do this. But what's really interesting is now we're working with a ton of data. So even if we do something unethical with the data, they also have a responsibility to flag this as well and either stop it within the organization or report it to a governing body. And as a whole, if that ever happened to someone like us, being only 3 years old and 30 people, we would never sign another client again, right? And so it's very interesting for me, the parallels of that first line of defense is your people actually working with the data with the client. Ethics starts there. Ethics it's on everyone's responsibility. Everyone has to see themselves as a champion for that.
It's not a box on a checklist.
No.
It's something you have to integrate into your processes.
Oh my goodness, no. And then you mentioned bias too, right? Well, when it comes to this data, geology data can be extremely biased. So much of when you're on the ground, you're collecting the data. Data looks like soil samples or it's satellite images that are collected by helicopters and drones. But when that gets sent back to the lab, geologists, geophysicists, geochemists, there's a lot of interpretation. And that interpretation can vary vastly depending on where you're trained, who you trained with, and what you were taught to identify. And so how do you remove that bias, right? It is a very, very, very difficult topic. And removing bias in geology data is actually, there's a perfect parallel when we're working on really, really big data problems across any single industry. How do you know that your data set's not biased?
And when you're dealing with a field like geology, where there is a lot of interpretation and intuition, you're looking at the data and you can't quite put your finger on it as to why it's this conclusion that you're drawing necessarily. The machine needs to be able to do that in a let's call it a rational, transparent way. So how do you ensure that the decisions that the AI is taking as to whether there's gold here or there or whatever it is can be explained and replicated?
Absolutely. So using black box models, that's a really tricky topic. I think especially the AI industry as a whole, we love to talk about deep learning, UNets, breakthroughs in neural nets, which is great. But the problem is we don't truly understand them, and it's very, very difficult. The data that goes in, I can't tell you the variables that were most important coming out. If I increase or change this variable, can I tell you without rerunning the model what happens on the other end? And so it's interesting. I think from a legal and an ethics perspective, it's obviously very important, right? Let's say you're declining somebody for a mortgage, you're making marketing decisions, and you happen to have variables that are very, very demographic based, right? It's important. But I think what's really interesting is from a practitioner's point of view, I hear constantly, I don't want my firm to work with you because you're going to take my job. I'm a geologist. This is the way I was trained to do it. I'm just not interested in my company pursuing AI. That transparency in algorithm is actually really, really important for our clients to be able to sign on and take a chance with us, which is really interesting. Because once the subject matter expert can see and understand and they can learn why they're not going to be replaced. They are so important in that puzzle, and you have to include them at the very beginning. You can't just steal all their data, do something magical, and pass something over at the end. It's a collaborative process to understanding and training those models.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, because as a lawyer, I look at it from the other side of when the data has already been processed, when the results are out, the legal implications of not being able to go back and explain it. So, if, for example, there's an argument over whether the AI is functioning properly, did you deliver the product that you were supposed to? Are you giving me the results that we agreed to in our contract? If you don't have algorithmic transparency, if you can't explain how the AI arrived at that end result, well, you're going to have a big uphill battle trying to argue that no, this did what it says on the tin. I mean, the problem here is not anything we did. Maybe the data that you gave us was biased, or maybe there's some other reason. But you can see that the algorithm is working the way it should and analyzing the data the way that we promised it would. Another reason that you need to have good transparency in your algorithms can just be for regulatory compliance. I mean, we were talking about privacy. One of the articles of the European privacy law, the GDPR, says, well, first of all, you can't use automated decision-making when it comes to human beings unless you fit into an exception. And even then, you've got to be able to explain why you did arrive at a certain conclusion when you were using this automated decision-making process. So again, if you don't have that algorithmic transparency, you're not going to be able to meet that obligation. Even here in Canada, there was a white paper that was put out by the Privacy Commissioner of Canada looking to reform our privacy laws federally. And one of the things that it raised is, well, maybe we should have similar requirement that requires organizations to be able to explain to people how it is that based on their personal data, they reached a certain decision about people. So, there are two ways that this works legally. I mean, do we have a problem today, whether it's liability, whether it's regulatory, and it's also, are we going to be compliant in the future? Because, we all know that the laws are changing. Privacy laws, relatively speaking, for the digital age are still in the era of, the horse and buggy. I mean, they were adopted many, many years ago for a different context, and that's not tenable long term. We know that they're going to change. We know they're going to be reformed. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell you how to comply with the letter of a law that hasn't been written yet, but we can make a pretty educated guess about where things are going based on policies, commentaries, drafts, and just looking at what's happening abroad. So, there are a lot of reasons to get ahead of this curve. What else do you when you're dealing with all of this very sensitive data, how do you ensure that it's secure? How do you ensure that people are not going to be putting their data at risk when they give it to you? How do you instill trust in the client as far as the data they're handing over to you, which, by the way, is often for public companies, so obviously very sensitive.
Absolutely. No, I always say that you're only as strong as your weakest link. Like absolutely, right? And so obviously collaborating with the client and understanding what their comfort is with their data, their security, that's really important. If they don't want their data in the cloud, their data doesn't go in the cloud, right? Maybe there's an opportunity there. We can show them. Sometimes there's a very big price difference between storing data on-house, on-premise versus data in the cloud. But then that's a conversation. But that's ultimately up to the client to decide. We don't push them one way or the other. When it comes to internally, then it's making sure that you have security controls at every single step of that journey. So, for instance, if data is in the cloud, our clients today, you can create multi-factor authentication. So I know every single one of my employees, we're quite young, so everyone's glued to their cell phones. And so, if they log into a client data set somewhere with this username, this login, their phone is going to immediately get some sort of a notification, and they have to verify on both ends, are you who you say you are? Little things like that. When it comes to actual computers and security, like especially startups and entrepreneurs are very guilty of this. You just, you've got your work computer, but you might leave that at home, and you run home and you use your cell phone or your iPad and your MacBook, your personal computers, and you're accessing client data through that because it's just easier, more convenient. You don't like your corporate laptop. Great. Not good enough. It really isn't. I hate being that person in the company that's like, no, like, where's your antivirus? Where's your ransomware? We have to be very cognizant of this. I had someone in the company, we started implementing different password protection. And they're like, can you just turn off the change your password every 3 months thing? I'm like, no. Because if they get into your email and through you, they can access every single one of our files and then our client files. Again, that's our reputation on the line, right? They always, whenever I start typing and the topic contains the word security, I know some of them, they're just like, oh no, Sarah's talking about cybersecurity again. What is she going to make me download? What is she going to make me do? What is she going to make me implement? But you know what? They ultimately, if we want to be able to actually grow and expand in our business, we have to be cognizant of it. Data is so important, and that data is not ours; it's our clients.
Yeah, and what you said about dealing with the employees is so important because whenever I'm drafting a policy for a client, whether it's a privacy policy, cybersecurity, whatever it might be, there's always that aspect of, look, we can write whatever we want on paper, but it matters what people are actually going to do in the real world. If everyone is writing their password on a Post-it and sticking it on their monitor, that doesn't help you. So you've got to make sure that you're working with your people, not to throw in the towel and say, well, this is not going to go anywhere, so, there's nothing we can do, but to really educate them about, well, why is it that we need to change our passwords every 3 months? Why is it that we need this, pain in the rears, two-factor authentication? It's not because, we just like to be difficult. It's because we want to make sure that people are actually following the procedures that are laid out for legal reasons, for business reasons, for ethical reasons. I mean, if you're dealing with medical data, you're dealing with financial data, data. Obviously, the consequences of a leak can be catastrophic for individual people, which would give rise to regulatory investigations, which would give rise to liability in civil courts. So it's important to sensitize your employees to why these processes are in place. It's not just for the fun of it.
Yeah, trust me, it's not fun. So, right? So everything is very, very important.
And so we've touched on liability a lot in this conversation. AI, it's not a regulated field as such. There's no Artificial Intelligence Act that you can go look up and say, okay, here's everything that we need to do. Here's a checklist. How do you manage navigating what's still an embryonic field, especially mass market AI, when you're trying to provide service to clients and manage your legal risk at the same time?
Well, it's a tricky one. I think one of the things that I think is really, really important is always having somebody on the team that understands and has more of maybe a governance function on those teams. And I don't mean at the end point, when after you've built a model and you've turned something over and the lawyer's like, hey, you didn't show me what variables you used in your model. No, it's having a conversation the minute the client tells you or the business partner, what you want to build, and it's having that cross-functional team and having continuous conversations. It should never, ever, ever be an adversarial relationship, you versus the lawyer, which I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of people who still feel that way, or you versus compliance, or you versus risk governance. You're only going to move ahead and manage those risks and those liabilities if you catch them really early on. If it's really, really late in the game, then what you're doing at that point in time, managing PR, your reputation, trying to salvage a client relationship. Whereas if you had just started at the beginning and were very honest and very clear about the steps that you've taken every step of the way, that's a much easier conversation to have. And you could potentially nip something in the bud much, much earlier before anything ever got out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as lawyers, we're always begging our clients, please just give me a call, 5 minutes, even off the clock. Just let me know what's up. Maybe I can flag a few things. Whenever you're dealing with legal risk, it's always a question of, what's the worst case scenario? I mean, being Quebec lawyer, the easy example I always give is, well, look, if you don't have a French version of your website and you're supposed to have a French version of your website, they're not going to shut down your business for that. But when you're dealing with data and you're an artificial intelligence company and data is at the heart of what you do, your entire business model is based on processing this data, you can't really afford to get that wrong. I mean, if you do something at the beginning and it's sort of questionable or in the gray zone, you're not consulting an expert, well 2, 3, 5 whatever years down the road, when you're financing, you're selling, you're looking to go public, whatever it is, it can be blown out of the water because of a problem at the root of what it is that you were doing and how you were doing it from the start. And that's just a nightmare that no one wants to see. I mean, I have seen, a transaction die simply because of the way that the company has going about its business, and the model itself was simply not on the up and up. I mean, it wasn't unethical, but it wasn't in compliance with the law, and no one wants to buy themselves a multi-million-dollar headache, so naturally they walk away.
I've had investors just straight up ask constantly. They're like, "Did you get your data legally?" And they're just like, "You can tell me, like, you don't have to answer in front of this crowd." And I'm like, "Of course we did." Right? But they have been burnt before by investing in companies that didn't procure their data in a legal way, which is mind-blowing to me because that is your business, right? That is the bread and butter. You are employing other people and you are trying to build your own legacy here. And you're going to do that by working off illegal data. It's crazy to me why people would do that. Some of it is just lack of awareness. But I have met players out there who are knowingly procuring data in a very interesting way, or not reading T's and C's or that sort of thing. It's not fun. Nobody likes reading T's and C's, right?
Well, speak for yourself.
That's true. There's a lot of lawyers here.
But one last thought maybe before we go to questions to see time's running out is, just because maybe you didn't go through the whole list of things and that you wanted to do at the beginning, the whole analysis of the legal aspects. It's not too late just because the train's already left the station. One of the things that we offer, one of the service lines for Dentons Data, is an audit service. And so we come in, look at the policies, look at the procedures, look at where the data came from, look at whatever else, and say, well, are you compliant as you should be? What can you improve? What can you change? What can be done to sort of maybe patch over something that might have done a different way in the past? It's never too late. It's only too late once the problem blows up in everyone's face, and then obviously that's just the worst case scenario. So it's never too late to solve a problem.
On that theme, I actually do want to mention something that we didn't touch on. Your analytics. So I think like data documentation, I think a lot of companies have a handle on that. Like, where does your data come from? What does each variable mean, X, Y, Z? But is there any documentation for how you built a model? Is there a step-by-step explanation of why you included this data? Why did you discard a variable? Why did you make this decision at this point in time? Why did you choose this tuning parameter? It's not just from a legal audit perspective. It's great because banks will be very audit ready if every single model they've built that makes any sort of customer or internal decision has this kind of documentation. But what if you have a data scientist that all of a sudden decides that they're going to make 3 times the money by moving to San Francisco and working for Google, and they leave tomorrow? Can you rebuild that model? Every single data scientist, trust me, they will give them the same data, they build a different model. So can you replicate that? Can you replicate that decision making? Every step of that journey needs to be documented, especially when you're working with black box models, because can you replicate that? I think the vast majority of especially startups cannot do this today. And that's not just business continuity. Like, forget the legal, ethical, privacy perspective of that. What happens tomorrow if, someone goes on vacation? Like, you need to put more time and effort into that. And data scientists, they hate this. They're like, I didn't go to school in English. Why should I document anything? But it makes their lives easier if someone dumps them a model the next day saying like, so-and-so is going on vacation.
Yeah. One more reason that got to ensure algorithmic transparency. So I see we've got a couple of minutes left for questions. I'll open it up to the floor.
Thank you. When it comes to analyzing complex pictures, geographical pictures, obviously you're going to need deep learning to decode that. And you may have 100, 200 layers of nodes. You don't know exactly what each nodes are. You have a hard time documenting it. What do you do then?
Great. That's a great question there. So when it comes to the satellite data, you're absolutely right. Like, it is very difficult because the algorithms that, quite frankly, work best on them are black boxes, right? That being said, satellite data, at least for our business and where we are successful, is actually a very, very small fraction of the overall data that we work with. And typically we're using that satellite imagery and we're looking for something very, very specific. So it could be something as mundane as this pixel, is this like white patch here? Is that a cloud? Or is that like a building of some sort, right? And so there's a very tangible answer that we're trying to answer that can be verified later. So we haven't run into a situation where that explainability from that perspective has been too difficult for us. But what's more interesting is all the other different layers of data. We try to consciously make an effort to choose and use algorithms that are much more open. Things like clustering and supervised learning and even logistic linear regressions. You never know these like basic AI techniques. And I'm sure there's people who are like AI specialists, like, oh, she just said regression. That's not AI. I think it's AI. It's a very, very early day. It's a statistical modeling technique, and AI is still built on mathematics, believe it or not. But using all of those in a way and where I can rank importance of variables and I can show that to the client and I can collaborate, where I can throw out variables and they can look at the correlations that we come up with, that's really important to us. So you're right, I am very careful about making sure where we use OCR, computer vision, deep learning on those, and they usually are in areas that that explainability is not as important to us anymore.
Quick question before we move to our next panel. Over. Share my mic.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. For someone who doesn't have a data scientist role in your organization, but you're looking towards AI, What are the most important qualities that you'd be looking for in a data scientist?
Creativity, the ability to think outside of the box. Actually, we were talking about this earlier. Quite frankly, there are so many free and amazing places where people can learn data science skills online. So within a couple months, you can grab a certificate from Coursera, which is endorsed by Stanford, for instance, right? But that doesn't make a data scientist. That could make someone who understands the basic principles, but that doesn't mean they actually know and understand how to work with the nuances of true data. So I like to see that we always use a case when it comes to our data scientists, because it's easy to talk about how you're using data and how you would use data, but actually throwing them some data and giving them some sort of a small challenge. So we do something that's obviously not really related to anything in the business, so that because there are some interesting legal concerns there, and we got the question being like, am I just building you your business model right now? And it's like, no, clearly no, absolutely not. And really trying to have somebody who does know and understand data at that table at every point in time is really important. But great data scientists, they can approach it from more of a mathematics perspective or a computer science perspective, from depending on if you're which school of the AI foundations you come from, and then really pushing and pulling on them on like, how do you impute data? What happens if this is missing? What happens if the client wants this? Why can't you explain your model? Why did you choose this model? There's a lot of nuances there.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent panel. I really enjoyed that. I hope everyone here did.